Good day, team. Today I'm going to show us how to fill out properly a disclosure form. The reason that we need this disclosure form is legal purposes. So, in the event that we have a listing um, and we have a client, let's say myself and Jonathan both have separate clients. Jonathan has the client who's going to be selling the house, and I have the client who's going to be buying the house. Well, we both need to have dual agency. We need this legally signed so that the client understands that we are looking out for their best interest. So I'm going to show you one that I had filled out about a year ago. The client actually never signed it, which happens a lot because clients be like, well, I don't want to sign anything until you show me something. And we're not working like that because we wouldn't go to our jobs and not clock in and work. So we're not going to go in and not clock in and work here. So let's see. Disclosure regarding real estate agency relationships. So initially you have here the seller's agent, which would be the person selling the house. And it says the seller's agent is an agent who is engaged by a seller to represent the seller's interest. The seller's agent does this by securing a buyer for the seller's home at a price and on terms acceptable to the seller. A seller's agent has, without limitation, the following fiduciary duties to the seller: reasonable care, undivided loyalty, confidentiality, full disclosure, obedience, and duty to account. A seller's agent does not represent the interest of a buyer. The obligations of a seller's agent are also subject to any specific provisions set forth in an agreement between the agent and the seller. In dealing with the buyer, a seller's agent should A. exercise reasonable skill and care in performance of the agent's duties, B. deal honestly, fairly, and in good faith, and C. disclose all facts known to the agent materially affecting the value or desirability of the property, except as otherwise provided by law. Okay, so that's what the role of a seller's agent is specifically. A buyer's agent. A buyer's agent is an agent who is engaged by a buyer to represent the buyer's interest. The buyer's agent does this by negotiating the purchase of a home at a price and on terms acceptable to the buyer. A buyer's agent has, without limitation, the following fiduciary duties to the buyer: reasonable care, undivided loyalty, confidentiality, full disclosure, obedience, and duty to account. A buyer's agent does not represent the interest of the seller. The obligation of a buyer's agent are also subject to any specific provisions set forth in an agreement between the agent and the buyer. In dealings with the seller, a buyer's agent should A. exercise reasonable skill and care in performance of the agent's duties, B. deal honestly, fairly, and in good faith, and C. disclose all facts known to the agent materially affecting the buyer's ability and or willingness to perform a contract to acquire the seller's property, that are not inconsistent with the agent's fiduciary duties to the buyer. And a broker's agent, generally what we want to sign up as. A broker's agent is an agent that cooperates or is engaged by a listing agent or a buyer's agent, but does not work for the same firm as the agent or buyer's agent, to assist the listing agent or buyer's agent in locating a property to sell or buy, respectively, for the listing agent's seller or buyer agent's buyer. The broker's agent does not have a direct relationship with the buyer or seller, and the buyer or seller cannot provide instructions or direction directly to the broker's agent. The buyer and seller, therefore, do not have vicarious liability for the acts of the broker's agent. The listing agent or buyer's agent do provide direction and instruction to the broker's agent, and therefore the listing agent or buyer's agent will have liability for the acts of the broker's agent. Now, Dual agent. So a dual agent is a real estate broker that may represent both the buyer and the seller if the buyer and the seller give their informed consent in writing. In such a dual agency situation, the agent will not be able to provide the full range of fiduciary duties to the buyer and the seller. The obligations of an agent are also subject to any specific provisions set forth in an agreement between the agent and the buyer and the seller. An agent acting as a dual agent must explain carefully to the real estate broker, to both the buyer and the seller, that the agent is acting for the other party as well. The agent should also explain the possible effects of dual representation, including that by consenting to the dual agency relationship, the buyer and the seller are giving up their right to undivided loyalty. A buyer or seller should carefully consider the possible consequences of dual agency relationship before agreeing to such representation. A seller or buyer may provide advanced informed consent to dual agency by indicating that on this form. So then a dual agent with designated sales agents, which is what we should always be checking. So if the buyer and seller provide their informed consent in writing, the principals and the real estate broker who represents both parties as dual agent may designate a sales agent to represent the buyer and another sales agent to represent the seller to negotiate the purchase and sale of real estate. A sales agent works under the supervision. Scroll up. Why is this not scrolling up? There we go. Of the real estate broker, with informed consent of the buyer and seller in writing. The designated sales agent for the buyer will function as the buyer agent's representative, representing the interest of and advocating on behalf of the buyer, and the designated sales agent for the seller will function as the seller's agent, representing the interests of and advocating on behalf of the seller. A designated sales agent cannot provide the full range of fiduciary duties to the buyer or seller. The designated sales agent must explain that, like the dual agent under whose supervision they function, they cannot provide undivided loyalty. A buyer or seller should carefully consider the possible consequences of a dual agency relationship with designated sales agents before agreeing to such representation. A seller or buyer may provide advanced informed consent to dual agency with designated sales agents by indicating the same set forth on this form. So this is already pre-filled out because this was a client I was dealing with at Coldwell Banker. However, as you can see, there's some checks that you would fill in. So for the purposes of learning what we're going to fill in, we can see it already filled in here. So as you'll see, it'll be the name of the agent. So this would be whoever the agent who dealt with the client is. In this situation, it's me, so therefore my name is there, Alonzo Hall. You want to print the name of the licensee, and then you want to print the name of the company here. At the time, it was Coldwell Banker. Now it's going to be Gold Rock Realty, LLC. So we're always currently we're dealing with buyers often, so we're going to most often be checking off buyers that we're representing the buyers in this situation. Now, we may represent them as a buyer's agent. Generally, we would represent as brokers' agents because Dwayne was mentioning that in certain MLSs, agents are sticklers. So one of the things in real estate they'll be sticklers is a lot of agencies or brokerages will not co-broke with a buyer's agent specifically. But if you're a broker's agent, they'll split the commission with you gladly. So those are small nuances that you're not going to learn in real estate school, but you will learn from physically doing the activities that are involved in real estate once you get licensed prior to being licensed. So we're generally going to click dual agent with designated sales agent. Again, we're not telling them that we are going to find a property that is listed with us, but we're telling them we can, and if we do, I'm still representing you. And there will be a designated agent who will take care of the responsibility for the seller, so you're always going to have that situation. You're always going to be fully represented. Let's see here. And then you want to give them advanced informed consent. So you're saying, listen, I'm telling you this before we even go shopping, that we might find someone who has a property, and it's within our brokerage. So we need your consent. And then you put their signature would go here of the buyer. You would check this, and then you put their name and signature and the date. Fairly simple. I'll be uploading shortly a video that has to do with looking at an offer sheet and how to fill out an offer sheet. So with that being said, you're going to start getting these. I'm loading them up, so I expect for you guys to be paying attention, watching these videos, and coming to me with questions, concerns, comments, or feedback, and asking for help. If not, no harm, no foul. But we're trying to move this thing forward fairly fast. So, as I mentioned, I will be showing favoritism to those who are doing the work. With that being said, let's go. I hope you enjoyed the video. There will be one again shortly.